In June 1986, a quiet afternoon in North Miami Beach, Florida, turned fatal. The final words of the victim were, "Do not shoot." For nearly 4 decades, the case remained unsolved until a breakthrough came. Shirley Brant was born on June 14, 1936, and grew up in Florida. In the 1960s, she pursued a career in entertainment, performing as a singer on cruise ships alongside her sister. The stage lights and applause marked the beginning of Shirley's professional journey. However, by the early 1970s, she shifted her focus to real estate. She began her real estate career by selling residential homes. It was not long before Shirley set her sights higher, transitioning into commercial real estate. Outside of her career, Shirley was devoted to her family and community. She was married to Dr. Laci Peterson, a well-known dentist in their area, and together they raised 4 children. Shirley actively participated in charitable efforts, especially those supporting Soviet Jews during the Refusenik movement. On June 13, 1986, everything changed. Shirley was at work in her second-story office at Brant Realty Corporation, located on Northeast 18th Avenue. She was on the phone chatting with a friend, while a coworker nearby was quietly focused on entering data into a computer. According to the police, 2 men walked into the office without warning. One of them immediately turned aggressive, demanding that Shirley hang up the phone. The authorities would later describe the incident as an attempted robbery. But when Shirley refused and began to scream, the man responded with fatal force. Despite her desperate final words, "Do not shoot," he fired a shot directly at her face. The phone receiver was ripped from the landline base and left beneath her desk as both men fled the scene. Emergency responders rushed Shirley to Parkway Regional Hospital, but the damage was irreversible. She succumbed to her injuries not long after arriving. The autopsy confirmed that Shirley's life was ended by the single gunshot wound to the head. The investigators acted swiftly, collecting fingerprints from around the scene, including prints on the phone found under Shirley's desk. But despite this evidence, the case began to unravel. For reasons that remain unclear even decades later, the prints were never submitted to the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, a database that might have helped identify a suspect early on. It was a critical opportunity missed in the pursuit of justice for Shirley. At the time of the shooting, a witness present in the office described the 2 suspects as nicely dressed. Both men were seen wearing dress pants and long-sleeve collared shirts. The investigators believe that this deliberate choice of attire may have been a tactic to appear professional and avoid drawing attention to themselves. After the shooting, the suspects did not just flee the scene. They took cash and credit cards with them, adding theft to the violence they had already committed. In a desperate bid for answers, Shirley's family offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the man responsible for the shooting. The weapon was described as a small-caliber firearm, but beyond that, there were no solid leads. With no arrests, no suspects, and no further developments, the investigation eventually lost momentum. Time passed, and the trail grew cold. But in January 2023, almost 37 years after the crime took place, the North Miami Beach Police Department launched a new cold case unit to review unsolved cases. The investigators revisited Shirley's case and uncovered the original fingerprints collected from the crime scene. These prints were resubmitted using updated forensic technology. On March 21, 2025, the breakthrough finally came. A match was found. The fingerprints were linked to 64-year-old Jeffrey Taylor. He was arrested on April 24, 2025, and charged in the second degree with using a firearm. Taylor was booked into the Turner Guilford Knight Correctional Center in Miami, where he remains held without bond. Shirley's son, Ben Brant, spoke at a press conference outside the North Miami Beach Police Headquarters, describing his mother as a trailblazer who broke barriers and gave generously to philanthropic causes. In the weeks following Shirley's demise in 1986, her husband turned grief into action. He launched the Shirley Brant Memorial Fund Against Handgun Crime, aimed at addressing the growing threat of gun violence. He said at the time, "People have been calling up and saying, 'What can I do?' What they can do is they can vote for elected officials who want to do something about gun control. He also offered a pointed response to the NRA's slogan, stating, "Guns do not end people's lives. People with guns end people's lives." Dr. Lawrence Brant remained dedicated to that cause until his passing in 2016. North Miami Beach Police Chief Juan Pinillos underscored the importance of the development, stating, "The resolution of this case reflects our department's commitment to justice, no matter how much time has passed. While Taylor's arrest is a major milestone, the investigation remains ongoing. The authorities continue to search for the second man who was present during the attempted robbery as the pursuit of full accountability for Shirley's case moves forward." In October 2001, a 25-year-old woman vanished after leaving her boyfriend's home in Willard, Ohio. Despite years of funding billboards and chasing leads in a relentless search for answers, a breakthrough would only happen more than 2 decades later. Regina Rowe Hicks was born on September 13, 1976 in Norwalk, Huron County, Ohio, to Laci and Raleigh Rowe. She grew up in the nearby town of Willard. She was a member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars in Willard and actively participated in community activities. As a young adult, she married Paul Hicks, and the couple had one son, Montana Hicks. Though the marriage began with promise, it eventually deteriorated. By 2001, Regina and Paul were estranged. Despite the marital struggles, Regina remained a devoted mother, always putting her son's needs first, even when she started a new relationship. On the evening of October 18, 2001, 25-year-old Regina was last seen leaving her boyfriend's home around 8 p.m. in her white Chevrolet Camaro. She told him she was going to pick up her son. Tragically, she never arrived at her destination. Concern quickly spread among her loved ones, who knew something was terribly wrong. Her family launched a frantic search. At the time, Paul, her estranged husband, made a chilling call to Chad Rowe, Regina's brother, saying ominously, "They think she's in the pond." That comment would later raise serious suspicions. The police were notified, but jurisdictional confusion between Willard Police and the Huron County Sheriff's Office created immediate complications. Chad later criticized the early handling of the case, saying the officials dropped the ball during the most critical moments of the investigation. As days passed with no word from Regina, anxiety turned to dread. Family, friends, and the community desperately hoped for a miracle, but what followed would confirm their worst fears. On October 22nd, 4 days after she went missing, Regina's white Camaro was discovered submerged in a pond near Section Line Road 30 in Willard. Inside the vehicle, in the passenger seat, was Regina's lifeless body. An autopsy revealed bruising on her head, pointing to foul play. The authorities then ruled out the case as an accident. From the beginning, the case was riddled with problems. Confusion over jurisdiction, mishandling of the scene, and slow progress stalled the investigation. Still, Regina's mother, Laci Holbrook, refused to accept silence as a verdict. For over a decade, she poured her heart and finances into the search for justice, paying for billboards, offering a $20,000 reward, placing newspaper ads, and even conducting interviews with potential witnesses. Laci's efforts were heroic, but they took a toll. The emotional burden and physical strain ultimately led to her declining health. She was diagnosed with cancer and passed away without seeing her daughter's perpetrator brought to justice. Despite the emotional fatigue, Chad kept his sister's memory alive. He never stopped asking questions, never stopped pressing for answers. In 2024, after more than 2 decades, new hope emerged in the form of Ashley Ford, a community activist and podcaster known for her work on cold cases. With the Rowe family's blessing, Ford began producing episodes about Regina's unsolved case, digging into old evidence, reading Laci's notes, and contacting the local authorities. Ford's podcast caught public attention and reignited interest in the case. She approached the investigation with a mother's empathy and a journalist's persistence. Her episode struck a chord with listeners, and soon, the case was no longer just a local tragedy. It became a symbol of community-led justice. Ford said, "Reading through the mom's notes is so hard. To know she passed away never getting justice And she was so close. I started where she stopped." After Ford's coverage, agents from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation visited Chad, something they had not done in years. That visit signaled a turning point. It appeared the wheels of justice were finally turning again. Chad expressed cautious optimism, saying, "I am hoping within the next year or so, we can get it all solved and get the right people that need to be in jail. On April 23, 2025, nearly 24 years after the case was opened, the long-awaited breakthrough came. Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost and Huron County Prosecutor James Sitterly announced that 50-year-old Paul Hicks, living in Sandusky, had been indicted on 3 counts of slaying and 1 count of kidnapping. He was arrested by agents from BCI and the U.S. Marshals Service in Seneca County. He was not a stranger to criminal allegations. In 2019, he had turned himself in after being wanted for 4 years in connection to an elaborate arson scheme where he attempted to have his own home burned down. Prior to the fire, cameras captured 2 people entering the home carrying gas cans. They can be seen removing 2 large TVs and dousing the inside of the house. Hicks tried blaming the fire on his ex-girlfriend and pointed her out in the video. He went to extremes to frame her. He had another woman purchase a custom mask from a company called That's My Face and had her buy a wig that matched his ex's hair. Hicks also bought a video surveillance system and protected the recording device inside a fireproof box so that the so-called evidence would survive. The investigators questioned the ex-girlfriend, but she was cleared. In 2019, Hicks was indicted on aggravated arson, perjury, and insurance fraud charges. The case went through years of court appearances and continuations. Ultimately, Hicks took a plea deal, pleading no contest, and was found guilty on a misdemeanor insurance fraud charge. He was sentenced to community control. Civilly, though, Allstate won its case, and Hicks agreed to pay $400,000 to the insurance company. These past allegations painted a troubling picture of Hicks's history and character. During a press conference, Attorney General Yost said, "Recent developments have opened a door and led to, at long last, an indictment. Now it is up to us to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law." Though the legal process is expected to be long, for Chad and the memory of his mother, Lacella, the arrest of Paul Hicks is a long overdue first step in securing justice for Regina. The investigation remains ongoing, and the authorities continue to encourage anyone with information to come forward. Attorney General Dave Yost said, "Recent developments have opened a door and led to at long last an indictment. Now it is up to us to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt beyond a court of law." Hicks was arraigned, and he entered a plea of not guilty. His bond was set at $2 million. In December 2002, a pregnant wife went missing from their Modesto, California home. As loved ones searched frantically and police launched an investigation, the public watched in horror as what began as a missing person case quickly unraveled into something far darker. Laci Peterson was born Laci Denise Rocha on May 4, 1975 in Escalon, California, to Sharon and Dennis Robert Rocha. She was the youngest of 2 children. When Laci was just 2 years old, her parents divorced, and Sharon moved with her children to Modesto, while Dennis remained on the family's dairy farm. Laci spent weekends visiting her father at the farm, maintaining a connection to her rural roots. Sharon soon entered into a long-term relationship with Ron Gransky, who, although never legally married to Sharon, became a father figure to Laci and her brother. Laci thrived in her early years, both socially and academically. She became a cheerleader during junior high and continued through high school. She graduated from Thomas Downey High School and pursued higher education at California Polytechnic State University. There, she majored in ornamental horticulture. In mid-1994, Laci's life took a new turn when she met Scott Peterson. Struck by their immediate connection, Laci gave him her phone number and later confided in her mother that she believed she had met the man she would marry. Scott eventually called, and the two began dating. As their relationship deepened, Scott chose to set aside his ambition of becoming a professional golfer, deciding instead to focus on a stable business career. This marked the beginning of their serious commitment to building a life together. After dating for 2 years, Laci and Scott moved in together, and in 1997, they got married at the Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort. Their relationship appeared solid and hopeful as they embarked on married life. In October 2000, they purchased a charming 3-bedroom, 2-bath bungalow on Covina Avenue, nestled in an upscale neighborhood near East La Loma Park in Modesto. Professionally, the couple seemed well established. Laci worked part-time as a substitute teacher, a role that suited her nurturing nature. Meanwhile, Scott secured a position with TradeCorp USA, a newly launched branch of a European fertilizer company. His job came with a monthly salary of $5,000 before taxes, giving the couple a degree of financial stability as they planned for the next phase of their life together. In 2002, the couple received joyful news. Laci was pregnant. Her due date was set for February 10, 2003, and they had already chosen a name for their unborn son, Connor. As her pregnancy progressed, Laci embraced the experience with happiness and excitement. Life felt full and promising, yet behind the surface of this seemingly idyllic chapter, an unseen danger loomed, one that Laci could never have anticipated. On the morning of December 24, 2002, Scott Peterson returned home from a solo fishing trip to the Berkeley Marina, only to find that his pregnant wife, Laci, was missing. Concerned, he called Laci's mother, who immediately contacted other family members. The family gathered at the Peterson home and began reaching out to friends and neighbors in search of any information about Laci's whereabouts. As the situation grew more serious, Laci's stepfather, Ron, contacted the Modesto Police Department and filed a missing person report, prompting the first official steps in what would become a widely publicized investigation. When the Modesto police officers arrived at the Peterson residence, they conducted a preliminary interview with Scott and did a cursory search of the house. Scott told the detectives that he had gone fishing for sturgeon at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles away from Modesto. He claimed that Laci had been home earlier that morning, watching a Martha Stewart television program about meringue, preparing to mop the floor, bake cookies, and walk the family dog, Mackenzie, to a nearby park. He said that upon returning that afternoon, Laci's vehicle was in the driveway, the house was empty, and he had found Mackenzie alone in the backyard, still wearing his leash. Inside the home, the police found Laci's keys, wallet, sunglasses, and purse stored in a closet, raising questions about her abrupt disappearance. As news of Laci's vanishing spread, an intensive search effort quickly mobilized. On December 25th, more than 900 individuals, including friends, family members, and neighbors, joined the search, canvassing the area and posting missing person flyers. The authorities offered a $25,000 reward for information about Laci's whereabouts. That amount soon increased to $250,000 and was eventually raised to $500,000 in the hopes of encouraging new leads. Though the case initially lacked concrete evidence of foul play, the investigators harbored growing suspicions. Scott's demeanor and actions began drawing scrutiny from the detectives, who noted inconsistencies in his statements and behavior. As days passed without new clues, the authorities grew more concerned that something more sinister had occurred. Just days after Laci was reported missing, the detectives received a tip that shifted the direction of the investigation significantly and placed Scott under intense suspicion. Amber Frey, a massage therapist from Fresno, came forward with startling information. She informed the detectives that she had been romantically involved with Scott for over a month and had believed he was single. On December 30th, Amber disclosed that she had met Scott on November 20th and he had told her he was unattached. Even more disturbingly, she recalled Scott telling her on December 9th, 2 weeks before Laci vanished, that he was a widower and that the upcoming Christmas would be his first without a wife. Amber's testimony radically altered the course of the investigation. The timeline she provided suggested that Scott may have been planning Laci's crime well before her disappearance. Hoping to gather incriminating evidence, the detectives equipped Amber with a recording device to capture her conversations with Scott. On April 13, 2003, the long search for Laci and her unborn child came to a grim conclusion. While walking their dog along the shoreline, two individuals discovered the remains of a male fetus. The fetus was found in the San Francisco Bay Area, near the Richmond shoreline. The next day, on April 14th, a jogger stumbled upon a partial human torso in the riprap along the Point Isabel shoreline, just about a mile from where the fetus had been found. The remains were severely decomposed, but their proximity raised immediate concern for investigators who had been closely monitoring the area since Laci's disappearance. DNA testing confirmed the worst fears of Laci's family and the investigative team. On April 18th, forensic analysis verified that the two sets of remains were those of Laci and her unborn son, Connor. The results marked a turning point in the case, formally shifting it from a missing persons investigation to a slaying case. Laci's remains were in a horrifying state. Her body was bloated and missing significant parts, including her head and arms. Her internal organs were also absent, and what remained showed signs of advanced decomposition. An autopsy revealed disturbing findings. Laci had suffered 2 cracked ribs and fractures to her neck bones, though it was unclear whether these injuries occurred before or after her demise. Despite the severe damage, her uterus and cervix were found intact, a detail that raised more questions about the nature and timeline of the crime. The condition of her body and the separation of her remains from the fetus presented a complex forensic challenge. Still, the discovery provided crucial evidence that would strengthen the case against Scott. The location of the remains also drew significant attention. The shoreline where the bodies were found was just a few miles from the Berkeley Marina, where Scott claimed he had gone fishing on the day of Laci's disappearance. This geographic connection deepened investigators' suspicions and solidified their focus on Scott as the primary suspect. With the confirmation of Laci's and Connor's demises, the authorities were able to escalate their investigative efforts and prepare for an arrest. By this time, Scott had been staying in San Diego with his family, stating that he was trying to avoid the relentless media attention that followed the case. However, his behavior raised additional red flags for investigators. On April 18th, the same day the DNA results were confirmed, the police located and arrested Scott at a golf course in San Diego. The circumstances of his arrest would only add to the suspicion surrounding him. At the time of his arrest, Scott was carrying over $10,000 in cash, multiple cell phones, camping gear, and his brother's identification. These items suggested the possibility that Scott was preparing to flee or go into hiding, a theory that further supported law enforcement's decision to take him into custody. The arrest brought a dramatic turn in the case that had captivated the nation, and it signaled the beginning of the legal proceedings against Scott. Scott Peterson was formally arraigned on April 21st, facing 2 counts of slaying, one for his wife and the other for their unborn son. Although the prosecution believed that Scott had planned and executed the crime, the case lacked direct physical evidence tying him to the crime. No weapon was recovered, and there were no eyewitnesses to the act. Nevertheless, circumstantial evidence and Scott's behavior following Laci's disappearance played a major role in shaping the prosecution's case. One of the key challenges for prosecutors was the timeline. According to Scott, he had left the house that morning to go fishing, and the tight window of time raised doubts about whether he could have committed the crime and transported the bodies without being seen. Some witnesses claimed they had seen Laci walking her dog after Scott had already left for his trip, suggesting the possibility she may have been abducted. However, the investigators deemed these sightings unreliable, citing inconsistencies and the lack of corroborating details. Despite these uncertainties, the case proceeded to trial. Public interest remained high throughout the proceedings, and the courtroom was packed with media and observers as the details of the investigation unfolded. On November 12, 2004, the jury reached a verdict. Scott was found guilty on both counts. On March 16, 2005, Scott was formally sentenced to his end by lethal injection. He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where he joined hundreds of other inmates on California's capital punishment Rowe. Years later, the case would return to the headlines. In August 2020, the California Supreme Court reviewed Scott's sentence and determined that there had been significant errors during jury selection. The court ruled that potential jurors had been improperly dismissed for expressing general objections to the end-of-life penalty, a violation of Scott's right to a fair sentencing process. As a result, the court overturned the sentence, though it left the conviction itself intact. Following the court's decision, Scott was returned to San Mateo County for resentencing. In December 2021, the court issued its final decision. Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. With that, the legal process reached a new conclusion, one that ensured Scott would spend the rest of his life behind bars, even as the emotional scars of Laci and Connor's demises continued to linger. In 2025, more than 2 decades after the crime took place, the case came back in the news. In late April, the Los Angeles Innocence Project made a bombshell announcement. The nonprofit declared in a court filing that after a year-long investigation, it had uncovered new evidence that eviscerates the prosecution's theory of what occurred and proves Scott's innocence. The Los Angeles Innocence Project presents new evidence showing a home across the street from the Petersons that was burgled the day of Laci's disappearance, and that a witness reportedly heard a conversation between the burglars that Laci saw them and confronted them. The organization also says it has obtained new, sworn statements from witnesses who reported seeing Laci in the neighborhood after the prosecutors claimed that Scott ended her life. It also argues that it has uncovered new evidence linking the burglars to a van that was set on a fire nearby and had a mattress inside with apparent bloodstains. The filing states that the prosecution suppressed evidence of the police investigation into that incident and that it has not been subjected to more precise DNA testing to establish a link to Laci's case. A key argument from last month's filing emphasizes that new research and methods to determine fetal growth indicate that the Petersons' unborn child was older than the prosecution's expert witness, Dr. Gregory DeVore, said, meaning Laci's life was ended days after the prosecution claimed. Included in the petition was a declaration from Scott describing his behavior in his marriage as disgraceful and immature, but denying he played a role in the demise of his wife and their unborn child. He wrote, "I have steadfastly maintained my innocence from the moment my wife went missing on December 24, 2002, throughout my trial, appeal, and post-conviction proceedings, and to this day. I had absolutely nothing to do with the disappearance and ends of my wife and son. Now it is up to the court to decide if Scott will receive a new trial.